Hi, and welcome to section 2.8. This is the last section of Unit 2, and we're going to talk about viruses. Good question, what is a virus? And we're not going to be talking about computer viruses. We're going to be talking about this kind of virus right here, the kind that we associate with making us sick. One thing, there are a lot of there's a lot of information on some of these diagrams. What is important to note is simply that a virus is a very simple particle. And it consists of a tiny bit of either DNA or RNA. They vary a lot from virus to virus. And that DNA or RNA in here is surrounded either by a protein coat or sometimes a protein and lipid coat, such as this virus. So they vary a lot, but regardless, they are very, very simple. And we're going to be discussing, could they be alive? Some basic facts about viruses, and I want you to think about that question. Could they be alive or are they not alive? Think about that as we talk about them and about characteristics of them. They were first discovered in 1892 by a Russian botanist. So we haven't had a long time, I don't know, depends on what you think is a long time, to study them. They're very tiny particles. They have no cells, and that's important to note. They are not cells, and they do not have cells. They are much smaller and more simple than cells. Here's a picture of one right here. It's a bacteriophage, which means it feeds on bacterial cells. They do replicate, and they do evolve. But in order to replicate or evolve, they have to have help. They use the gene expression machinery of the host cells that they infect. We'll talk a little bit more about that. They cannot do it on their own. They must have a cell in order to replicate. So here's a little bit more on viruses. They contain only a little bit of DNA and RNA and have a protective protein coat, or as we saw before, sometimes it's a protein and lipid coat that surrounds that. Some viruses contain a few enzymes, or some will have a little bit of a membrane envelope. They still are not cells. They do not carry out metabolism, and they do not respond to stimuli. Viruses do not do those things, so they are not cells. Viruses do have an enormous impact on all organisms. As you know, when you get a cold that is the cause of a virus, there's a huge impact on you. There are a lot of other impacts too that are a lot more serious than just a common cold. So how exactly do viruses reproduce? Now, this is really fascinating because it gives us a lot of insight into the harm that viruses can do. And something to note, I just want to go over this again, a bacteriophage. It's a virus that infects a bacteria, the cell of a bacteria. And we're going to talk about two cycles of viruses. There's the lytic cycle. Down here, it just explains that a little bit more. This cycle, we'll go into detail about it, but the virus uses the host cell's materials to replicate DNA and make new viruses, and it eventually destroys the cell. The lysogenic cycle of a virus is one in which the virus can remain dormant, and then later it can become lytic and enter this lytic cycle. So what does that mean? If we start right here, the little start place, we have a bacteriophage right here, a virus that is infecting a bacteria, a bacterium, a bacterial cell. So it infects this cell, it enters this host cell right here, and if we go on the lytic cycle trajectory over here, the host DNA is basically digested and it's broken down. This represents the DNA of the host, and it's broken down into little pieces that the bacteriophage, the virus, then uses to incorporate into its own structure. It also uses enzymes from the host bacterial cell to help it form new viruses. And here they are, new viruses formed, and then at some point, there are enough of them, they burst open the cell. It's called lysing the cell. That's where we get the lytic cycle name, where we get that name. They burst open, and then they travel on to infect new cells. So that is the lytic cycle. The lysogenic cycle, if we start up here, where the bacteriophage enters the bacterial cell, and we come down here, enters the host cell. Instead of digesting this DNA material, the virus incorporates itself into the DNA material right here. So you have, it appears to be part of it. And then when that cell splits and divides, it replicates that virus too. So you get the virus being replicated within the cell's natural cell process. And then it can remain dormant, or it can take itself out of that and go and enter the lytic phase. So you can continue the lysogenic cycle, or it can come in here and enter the lytic cycle. Obviously, at the lytic cycle, there is an ending point. The cell is dead at this point. It is destroyed. So those are the two important cycles to remember about viruses. A few more viral tactics that are especially mean and terrible. In animal cells, the viral particle can be given off without lysing the cell. So when it gets to that point in the lytic phase where it's going to lyse, prior to that, one of the viruses can escape from the cell, and as it emerges, it can pick up part of the cell membrane, making it very difficult for the host to recognize the virus as an invader. And that's just a particularly nasty mechanism that viruses can use. The impact of viruses, obviously, they live at the expense, quote unquote, we're determining whether they are alive or not alive, but at the expense of the host organism. They pose a very serious threat to all cellular life. They replicate very quickly, they evolve very rapidly, and they can remain hidden inside the host cells, which are just particularly dangerous threats, really. They're very good at what they do. This is just an example of a poor little baby who has the chicken pox, which is a virus as well. So we haven't answered the question, but I would like you to think about what are things that make viruses living or like a living organism, and what are things that make it not like a living organism? And those are things we're going to be discussing, and I'd like you to show me. If you would like to go for advanced proficiency, there are so many things you could ask, and you probably have excellent questions about viruses that you could do some research on, write some paragraphs, come in and show me what you've researched. Why do antibiotics work against bacteria but not against viruses? What are those mechanisms? What kinds of viral treatments are available or becoming available? How do they work? How did Dmitry Ivanovsky discover the viruses? Ask more. There are a lot of questions here. I think it's a fascinating topic. Pick some interesting things that you'd like to look into and come and show me about those. That would be very exciting. So I'll see you in class.